Welcome, everyone, to Indications and Warnings with Chuck Pfarrer, co-produced by Alan Brewer. Chuck and I are recording this edition of Indications and Warnings on January 12, 2026. It is day 1,418 of Russia's full-scale genocidal invasion of Ukraine. It is something of a milestone, a red letter day, so to speak. Chuck, 1,418 days, as long as the Soviets fought the Nazis in World War II.
Yeah, pretty amazing. In this amount of time, Russia went literally pushing back from the gates of Moscow all the way into downtown Berlin and even farther. And thus far, they have only captured a little bit less than 20% of Ukraine, and in fact, they hold considerably less territory than they did in 2022. And I'm not giving them a W, Alan. I'm giving them one of these.
Yeah, they are a long way from winning. They still, from time to time, succeed in convincing some people that they are winning, but it's getting harder and harder for Russia to promote that narrative, especially as we will do in this show, especially when you look at the maps and how Russia has been caught in places like Pokrovsk. I don't think Russian commanders actually want to keep fighting in Pokrovsk, Chuck.
Well, we've said this before, that Russia is not likely to run out of men in the near future. But again, we keep saying this, they're running out of army, right? The men who get sent to the front and get sent to Pokrovsk, they know it's a one-way operation. And therefore, their combat efficiency is abysmal. And there has emerged this may be what land warfare is like going forward. But the larger the force Russia puts together to take an objective, the sooner it is discovered and wiped out. So one of the problems is, Russia, which is compelled to attack constantly, in totally disregarding evolving situations, changing objectives, weather, all the other considerations that a competent commander would use to say, how can I put together the best and most effective attack? He simply has a quota and he attacks every day. And that means sending 2, 3, 4 guys in. That means, as they have done in the last 3 years, stripping all the people out of their logistics outfits, support, supply, everything else, sending everybody to the front. And now they have very ineffectual forces, abysmal logistics, morale that has totally bottomed out, mutinies, refusals. Alan, this is the most critical winter of the war, and therefore I think it's going to be also the most tenuous spring that Moscow has, and that's still 90 days away.
Yeah, and the weather in Ukraine, it has been particularly cold and snowy. This has created an emergency situation throughout Ukraine, of course. At least half of Kyiv without power, most of Ukraine going through total blackouts for some part of every single day. And this is true from Lviv to Kharkiv, down to Odessa, up to Chernihiv. There is no place that gets 24 hours of power a day. And you're talking about temperatures that are below zero. You're talking about electrical workers who are real heroes having to thaw frozen wires and pipes and connections with blowtorches before they even have a chance to reconnect systems.
Yeah, and, Ukraine is a bit more prepared than most American cities would be. I mean, as we were there, a lot of key locations, whether they're commercial or military or mercantile, they will have their own generators. But still, I mean, it's tough. And just talking to somebody in Kyiv the other day, it's difficult.
Yeah.
It's quite cold. You're camping out even in your apartment, and God bless them, they're hanging in there.
Yeah, they are hanging in there. I don't know how they do it. And of course, that situation, the cold and the snow, I mean, these are essentially blizzard conditions in some areas of the zero line. We're going to go to a new map first, Chuck. And this is Hulayapol. And we're looking at Hulayapol from a map of 11 January because it's a situation that has simply exploded in a matter of a week.
Yeah, it really has. And this place really came back on the radar to just slightly orient our readers. Off the right side of the map, about 30 or 40 kilometers from the edge of the map, is the city of Orkiv, which we handled. I'll get back into covering that, but we spent a lot of time on that front in the battles of Robotny, Kopani. Those were places that people will remember. On the 25th of December, Russia, I don't even think it was a breakthrough, but Russian tactical elements were able to enter the battalion headquarters of the 108th Regiment. There was a breakdown between the regiment and its frontline troops. Nobody says, "Hey, boss, we're withdrawing." The Russians, but that enabled the Russians to capture this battalion level command node absolutely intact. Laptops going, videos going, everything. So they captured all of the frequencies, operational plans, call signs, everything. Pretty much a disaster, but the Russians were still not able to capitalize on that intelligence. They were not able to capture the entire city of Hulayapol, and they were not able to advance significantly into the terrain controlled by the 108th, which was a pretty big surprise. And from that time on, so that was Christmas time, this is the 11th, so for 2 weeks, the Russians really haven't pushed any farther than they were on the 25th, Alan. So, but as you can see from this map, lots of contact and especially a huge uptick in airstrikes.
Well, that was the very first thing that caught my attention, the number of airstrikes here, which might speak to some of the intelligence that the Russians found in the headquarters in Hulayapol. In other words, able to pinpoint really specific targets that matter to the Ukrainians.
Yeah, that's an absolutely perfect call. And if you drill in on this map, you can see a lot of these towns that I've marked. They're not even towns.
No.
You go through these little villages, hamlets in Ukraine. Not every crossroads, but a lot of them, and especially you're out here in what's basically rolling farm country. So some of these villages may actually be 5, 6, 7, 10 houses. But you'll notice they've hit pretty much every one of them, and it's a good call, Alan. I think they got their target sets out of that headquarters.
And when I say the situation has exploded, and this is a pretty larger scale map than some of the past maps of Hulayapol you've done, Chuck. So it's expanded quite a ways to the north, which really, again, surprised me.
Yeah, and so our map ends going north there at Nove Zaporizhzhia, and you see that big Ukrainian salient pushing in to the Russian, towards the east there. This map, you go off to the north and it swings sort of to the northeast and then to the north, and Pokrovsk is, if you were looking at me, Pokrovsk is up here and Hulayapol is down here. But it shows also just how permeable the lines are. We'll notice that in that salient to the west there, there's a Ukrainian group in contact on the Haicher River, and that is, let's see, let me check my own map. Look, that's 7-8 kilometers, that's 4 or 5 miles into the zero line. And the other day I reported 4, 5, 6 contacts on the river. So again, these are the symptoms that, Alan and I talk about. Russia's running out of army, right? They've got all these contacts at the front, but the Ukrainians are able to patrol behind them 5, 10 kilometers and strike these places. And, another thing to draw from that, look, you need good troops who can patrol 5, 6, 7 miles in the enemy rear, get to the target, not get discovered, ambush the target, get away, get resupplied, and hit another string of targets. That's some high quality field work right there.
Yeah. So this might also be an example of what, as you say, Chuck, the Ukrainians can't be strong everywhere. There is some guessing. I mean, you just use the best information you have and you decide how to deploy. Did the Ukrainians make a real mistake here? Is it something that is it a success that the Russians just stumbled into?
It really confused urban fighting. I don't exactly know the circumstances, but I can put this together like an accident investigation. In order for the right thing to have happened, the 108th units in front of it had to be in communication with the headquarters. They had to have an opportunity to say, look, we're falling back. We're within 4 blocks of the headquarters. They're pushing hard. You might want to start unplugging things. That's what should have happened. And that didn't happen. So there's a lot of reasons why that couldn't have happened. It's so cold, no one's batteries were working. They didn't have field runners. There's a lot of ways to let headquarters know what's going on, including pigeons, for God's sakes, And so in order to catch a headquarters like that napping, that had to happen. Or you've got a brilliant night operation and they came in there, kicked the door in and surprised everyone. But that didn't happen because I watched closely the Russian films. I didn't see things shot up. This was a walk-away situation. I tell you what else I didn't see. I saw a bunch of Russian soldiers standing around, and I guarantee you they put laptops in their packs. They took the TVs off the wall. I mean, none of that stuff made it up to their battalion-level intelligence people. And again, that's because they aren't good troops, right? You should have picked up everything, including the paper clips, everything, and then lay it out. First you take pictures of everything, and then you start bagging it up, and bag number 1, bag number 2, and you reassemble the headquarters. So, and just the fact that the Russians didn't take Heliopol on the basis of that one hit, it tells me they couldn't actuate on what they had.
Yeah. Now, Ukraine has reinforced, but not heavily in Heliopol. And, the next map we're going to go to is Pokrovsk. What happened here hasn't really affected the situation in Pokrovsk. There hasn't been a decrease of engagements in Pokrovsk, but obviously a significant increase in engagements here, 30 engagements in a day in a specific area of operations is a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. So there are, I would say, the focal points for the Russians right now in the east. Pokrovsk is number 1. Heliopol is kind of a distant second, and Kupiansk is third. But I'm starting to wonder, can the Russians prosecute 3 high-tempo operational areas at once? And part of the reason I say no is I don't think their command structure has the bandwidth to do it. I really don't. I say this all the time. It's military malpractice. These guys, you cannot run an army and prove to them every day that you don't care how many people get killed.
Yeah.
You don't. If you lead them well, they'll give you everything. They're almost like a dog. You know, you give them some scratches and you give them some beef bones, and they'll do anything for you. But if you treat them badly and drag them around and send them out to get their ass kicked every day, you get the Russian army in Ukraine.
Yeah. You know, there's also a real logistical problem for the Russians. When you look at the areas where they're fighting, they are quite a distance from one another. They're not on a straight axis, so you can't go down the line and supply everyone. And now you have this new place, Juliopol, probably the low man on the supply chain, right?
Yeah, and look what's going on here. We try to reverse engineer. What's the National Command Authority relationship to the tacticians here? Putin doesn't want to hear anything except you captured a city. We know that from the manner in which he's deploying his resources here. He wants Pokrovsk. He's been telling you since November 15th that he's captured it. And no matter how many times he said it, it didn't come true. He had a general saying that he had not only had he captured Kupiansk, but he had sealed off 14 battalions of Ukrainian troops. By the way, folks, that general has disappeared. He's gone. Nobody knows where he is. And he got the hero of Russia for taking Kupiansk. And now they've got Juliopol. All Putin wants to hear is, I captured fill in the blank. And it's not happening. And they're not fighting smart. To our Russian listening guests, you got to pull back from two of those areas, concentrate on one, and make that happen. Don't tell them what to do, Chuck. If you're that effing stupid, I could tell them what to do all day. They cannot do it, Alan, and I don't think they're able to do it.
No, it doesn't seem to be how they are thinking. I think a lot of it still has to do with Russians believing themselves to be so much better than Ukrainians, so far superior to Ukrainians, not only as military fighters, but culturally, any way you want to look at it from a Russian point of view. This is why they regard Ukrainians as inferior in every possible way, an inferior culture, an inferior language. They have demeaned the Ukrainians for decades and decades.
Yeah, and that's something you never want to do, really. You know, I sit here and I talk smack about the Russian army all the time, but I'm calling it like I see it. And, when I was in the business, you dug as deeply into everything you could learn about your adversary as possible. Everything. And you couldn't help but respect, at least where they were coming from, especially their true believers. But there's another thing. That no good army officer or military officer is going to look down on his opponent. Any of the epithets we could think that the Russians call the Ukrainians, that's not the place where winners start. Mm-hmm. And I think there's also this frustration building up in the Russian troops. Look, they know they've fought this longer in Ukraine than they fought the Great Patriotic War. They realize they haven't gotten to the Dnipro in the, as I say, folks, as the middle line of the country, and they're never going to get there, Alan. Look, we've been there. We didn't see anybody getting their ass kicked except the Russians.
Right. No, we didn't go to Pokrovsk. As I say, we could have turned right on the M30, but we wouldn't have gotten close to Pokrovsk even when we were in Ukraine. No. We were on the outskirts of Kostyantynivka, and we'll talk about that in a bit. But if we bring up the Pokrovsk map, the reason why I said the situation in Juliopol has not really affected the tempo of engagements in Pokrovsk, you look at that 11 January map, and you're talking about 60 plus engagements. You look at what I call the heat map on Ragnar Gudmundsson's daily analysis. Pokrovsk is still the hottest place on the zero line.
You know, and once again, we're looking at what is Pokrovsk, right? So what made this a military objective? And the Russians are constantly saying, and I even read in some of the more well-informed military press, a vital logistics hub in Donetsk. Let's pull back. 20 months ago, right, it was a vital logistics hub. Right now, it is not. It is a city proximate to the zero line. It's not a hub for anything. And that also includes, for example, the Russians were stalled in Donetsk City for almost 2 years. And they finally started moving down the highway, but they do it so slowly. It took 20 months to go the 25 miles into Pokrovsk. They've invested 250,000 casualties just here, 5 times the number we lost in all of the Vietnam War. And they still haven't taken the city. So we are talking about combat effectiveness, right?
Yeah.
We definitely are.
You look at any of these maps over the last 3 or 4 days, so from January 11, 10, or 9, and you see how the Ukrainians and the Russians are locked into battle here. Wouldn't you think the Russians at this point would want to disengage somewhat, pause, and quite possibly redeploy troops from Pokrovsk, maybe to Mariupol?
Alan, I'm with you, but we've got the equivalent of Hitler was a corporal who thought he was Alexander the Great. Putin he's never dug a foxhole in his life. He can't march. He was an intelligence officer, right? He has clowns around him. We talked about this extensively after the Prigozhin mutiny. We wrote that article. It was like, hey, this has forced Putin to marry Shoigu and Gerasimov. They're clowns. They are clowns. I was thinking at that point, he's lost the war now. He has lost the war. And here's something that happens in every sort of 3-year high consequence war. You can go back to the American Civil War, World War I, World War II. At least in a Western army, your true leaders they'll emerge from the crucible and the conflict. How unlikely was it in the United States? Ulysses S. Grant had resigned. He graduated at the bottom of his West Point class. General Sherman was considered insane. Nobody wanted anything to do with him. He was teaching at a military academy in Louisiana. But those people rose to the top. Putin has not his armed forces are not the institutions that are going to give rise to good military leaders. And that has doomed them. None of these guys has any talent at all. And unfortunately, if you do have talent in the Russian military and you stand up for your guys, you're going to get pulled. General Popov, for example, nobody knows where he is now. And he was an airborne commander who was fighting in Kherson. He's gone.
And
you can't win like that, Alan. You just won't. It's not going to happen.
As I think back, Popov in Kherson, he did stand up for his troops, didn't he? Because he might actually have refused orders to try to cross the Dnipro.
He was saying that these constant frontal assaults you're sending on us, tasking us with, they're not working. We need to reconsider what we're doing. And he did refuse orders. And, now he's gone. But what's so important to Putin is, look, he can't, I used to say this about Fidel Castro. Too many heroes make for a long parade, right? Che Guevara disappeared. Barbarossa disappeared. All of these clowns disappeared. Putin is so insecure, as all dictators are. You know, he got the military tamed and fattened by corruption, and everyone was living a nice life and making money and having villas in Spain. That was groovy. But when it came go time, none of those guys are competent field commanders. And you rose in a system that did not award military merit, scholarship. You know, every even mid-range officer in the NATO militaries, you're expected to have a graduate degree. You want to be a general, you need a PhD. You have to be a scholar. You have to be someone like General Ben Hodges, right? I know you've been impressed with the generals that we have talked to. They've been great guys.
Oh, yeah. And not just Ben Hodges. There are so many like him. Chris Cavoli, the most recent commander of NATO forces, a scholar as well as an experienced military guy in the field. This is the other thing. You are putting together expertise developed from experience in the field and leading forces with scholarship, which is part of a guy like Ben Hodges. It's part of his OODA loop, isn't it? And his mind is always at work.
Yeah, and you know, so every officer in the U.S. military will have a specialty. You know, so you might be a fighter pilot, I might be a SEAL, someone else might be a surface warfare guy, someone else might be a submariner. You master that, your profession, and as you move up into various levels of command that eventually become joint commands. So you start out as a green suiter or a blue suiter, and then they call it the purple suit when you're up at any joint command. You're expected then also to pick up the fundamentals of ground maneuver warfare. Even if you're a submariner, you better know something about airborne operations. How does artillery work? How do you manage an air battle? I mean, it's a lot of stuff. Putin doesn't have any of that. None of these guys can do that. And we're talking about a land war only, right? A regional war. These guys, they're not even infantry practitioners. They can't run special operations. It's just not happening.
Yeah.
But they can send a squad forward every day. Every 300 meters, there's a squad going forward, and they're getting hosed. And I'm not impressed with their leadership or their ability. I'm just not.
Well, when you look at the 11 January map from Pokrovsk, I mean, to put it mildly, there is fighting everywhere, absolutely everywhere, from Rodinsky around the corner through Minorod, through the center of Pokrovsk, all the way down to the west along the rail line to Kudary and even beyond that. And so I begin to wonder, has Russia chosen a place they want to get to? Because from this map, I wouldn't be able to figure out what they want to do.
You know, I would guess, you know, that, and I say guess because you never know what the enemy is going to do. But they want to capture the Pokrovsk agglomeration, right? They want Pokrovsk, Minorhard, Rodinsky. They have Moskovsky already. You know, and what's going on here? So why is Ukraine fighting so hard to hold this place? And why does Russia want it so badly? Russia just wants to be able to say we captured a city. Ukraine is here because this is the easiest place to kill 400 Russians every day. And that's the brutal math of it. About 1,100 Russians die every day, and about 400 of them are killed here. Well, that doesn't make any sense, Chuck. Well, here's why it makes sense. To fight from the ruins of a city, and the more ruined, the better, you can really put a hurting on an enemy. And you look, for example, in World War II. Following D-Day, the Bocage country, which is in many ways remarkably similar to what we have in Ukraine, agricultural areas, and then windbreaks and etc. And you look at where the Allies really took a beating, it was in the cities like Saint-Lô and Caen, and because the urban fighting was so tough. So Ukraine is here with the deliberate choice to fight an attritional battle. And interestingly enough, the Russians, that's the only game they can play. The Ukrainians own the poker table, right? They own the cloth, they own the chips, and they'll quit the game whenever they're not winning. But right now, the house, which is Ukraine, is winning by fighting in these urban areas. And look, we see the daily casualty rates.
Yeah.
And despite 10 or 15 to 1 numerical superiority, Russia still isn't winning it.
No. The casualties on the Russian side are more than 1,000 a day. And, some days more than 1,500 a day. So that when we get to the end of January, if this fighting continues with the intensity in Pokrovsk, I think January could turn out to be the deadliest month for the Russians ever in Ukraine.
And look, it's sort of weird. It's not weird. Ukraine is on the strategic defensive, right? And they'll take advantage of that unimpeachable battle math. If you are in a defensive position, the enemy has to come to you, and they have to come at you with at least 3 to 1 superiority. And look, I don't like to fight fair. I want to be 10 to 1 at the point of attack. But the Russians just keep pushing these people forward. And it used to be they were criminals, from the Gulag and used by Wagner. Now it's Malian. I don't even want to call these guys mercenaries. They're promised programming jobs, construction jobs, and they wind up in Green and in Pokrovsk, and they are used in the same way that Wagner used those prisoners. They advance to contact, and what that means is bullet sponge. Yeah. You just keep walking that way until we see you're dead, and then we'll know where the Ukrainians are. And it's that cynical, Alan, and that evil, and that's the way they do it.
Yeah. And the Russian soldiers call these mercenaries from Africa disposables. Ooh. So that's I don't know what the word is in Russian, but that is what they call them. Ooh. Look, if we just go back 4 days in Pokrovsk, Chuck, to the January 8th map, and this is a more concentrated look, so we really are focused on Minarad and Pokrovsk, and on this Russian armored assault on Frashini to the northwest of Pokrovsk. And that actually would be the place where you would want a Russian pincer movement to merge. Except now this is, I think, the second time, if not the third time, the Russians have aimed at Frashini, but from only one direction with no support whatsoever that would have to come out of Rodinsky, which is up to the northeast.
Yeah, here's the other thing. We see this so many times when the Russians doing the same thing, trying to cover the same ground in the same way. So there have been maybe 4 or 5 of these, more considerable armored, mixed vehicle attacks on that town, and they are just not making it there. So, what the skies are so dense with drones that do various different things. You've got systems like the Shark, which has got to be the coolest UCAV in the entire world. And it's up there, and it's the big eye, and it will see movement. It evaluates the Russian force that's coming. And when someone's saying it's 25 dune buggies, 5 tanks, and 15 infantry fighting vehicles, well, ironically and paradoxically in this war, that's the kind of Russian unit that gets wiped out the fastest and completely soup to nuts gone. And the Russians have tried that at least 5 times in that direction, and they're just not getting there. And instead of pulling back and saying, look, let's do something new, which you would do in a council of war with some competently trained company officers, they don't talk to anybody. It's like, You give me 5 more tanks and 15 more vehicles. You call me up when you got them, and we're doing it again.
Yeah, it's hard to believe. I mean, it's more evidence that whoever the Russian commander is up in Rodinsky is not talking to the Russian commander who's launching these attacks to the west of Pokrovsk. And you'd want to at least have a phone call, I guess.
Well, and you know what? These guys are in competition with each other, right? Too many heroes make for a long parade.
Yeah.
Only one guy's getting the Hero of Russia award out of this Pokrovsk thing, and the guy on the top of the mitten, he could care less what the guy in the thumb is doing.
Yeah.
And that's good. It's totally dysfunctional military command structure, and it's baked in, Alan. There's no way to... It would take 15 years to 20 to reboot the Russian army.
At least. Well, that is the situation in Pokrovsk, the city that supposedly fell a month or more ago, remains the site every single day of the most intense fighting on the zero line. Next, we want to go to Kupiansk, another place where the Russians claimed total victory. And now, having been kicked out of Kupiansk, Putin has given them a new deadline to retake this city in the month of February. Instead, the Russians are fleeing faster and farther than ever before.
Yeah, this is going to be another non-starter for the Russians. You know, so there is also this deadly loop that is fed, and I'm not making any excuses for Vladimir Putin. No one dares tell this guy the truth, right? There are so many different layers of bullshit and, reporting to specifications, as we used to say, which means in the Navy we call that gun decking. You go down to the gun deck and write it up and then come into the wardroom and brief it. So, his generals have told him, look, we're in control of the city. We've got it. We have troops right downtown. And as you're looking at this map, you'll see those 2 little red spots, one in the northern central part of the city in the P79, and the other in the quartering intersection there between the H26 and the P79. There are only about 50 Russians in each one of those red pockets. And as we speak, the latest contact information I read after I posted this, the Ukrainians have entered the civil administration buildings in the northernmost lodgements, and they have taken the principal building. There is a hospital near that area, and I try to get the maps, folks, that will give me the names of the buildings. They're really hard to get a hold of. But it looks like the northern lodgement is being reduced even as we speak. But the money shot, the key terrain here, as you know, I love it when Alan, who can read a map, has called this months ago. Look, that stuff north of the city, north of the urban area, Radivka and Halabuvka, and the area to the east of the P79 highway. You see how open that is. You can see the band of trees. And you can see that the Russians are being waxed on that open terrain north of the city. And that was where they put their ground lines of communication and supply. And if you are a Russian with a Wi-Fi signal in Kupiansk right now, I don't have to remind you, you are hungry. You haven't had any water for days. You probably have 15 rounds left in your magazine, and you're saving 1 grenade for yourself. Things are bleak for those guys, and to a Russian, no help's coming, dude. It isn't going to happen. And this city will not be under Russian control at the end of February, Alan, and I'll tell you why. I don't think they have the resources to do it. I just don't think they got them.
I don't think they have the resources, and the weather's not going to help them either. I mean, this really is the depth of the Ukrainian winter. You want to experience it, go to Kupiansk. Temperatures are under zero. um, pretty brisk winds and a lot of snow. Um, the other thing about Kupiansk, I would say, Chuck, is it could well become a goal of the Russian spring offensive. So you're not just talking about the end of February. You can get all the way through March and April when the landscape starts to dry a little bit. I think Ukraine will still be in complete control of Kupiansk and will probably have a perimeter defense that exceeds what they had just recently.
Yeah, and also to pull way back, like, to 100,000 feet here and look, the Ukrainians still enjoy, we've all talked about this a lot, internal lines of communication and supply, right? So I draw a circle. The Ukrainians are inside the circle. The Russians are outside the circle. And the Ukrainians can move along the radius straight to the circumference, but the Russians got to go all the way around. And that doesn't seem like much, except, generally there are 15 or 20 guys supporting one infantryman. Somebody works the mailroom, somebody repairs the weapons, somebody forwards mortar, someone else artillery, someone else works on the surface-to-air missiles, blah, 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 blah. That's the tail-to-tooth ratio. Russia has pulled out all of those support guys. So what they're left with is light infantry, okay? A rifleman, with the grenades. You can win a war that way, right? The American Revolution was won that way because the infantry was better, right? The infantry is so good. Rangers kick ass because they are meticulously trained, but they are still light infantry. That's where Ukraine is. The quality of their soldiers is better. Morale is better. Support is better. Look, my money's still on Ukraine. This war is going to Ukraine, and it's not going to Russia.
Yeah. And Chuck and I are in agreement on that. And we always have been. Unfortunately, it means a much longer war because you could use Pokrovsk itself as a metaphor for what Putin finds, the situation Putin himself finds himself in. He is locked in a battle that he cannot get released from, because if he moves to end the war, it will be the end of his leadership of Russia, quite possibly the end of his life.
And I think that situation is made more probable here because now the country's eating itself, right? Now his ability to produce oil is down somewhere between 20 and 30%. Now the world is seeing that he can't protect the shadow fleet, right? He doesn't have a blue water navy. He said he's going to back Venezuela to the hilt. Look, it's almost from a James Bond movie. America went in there and grabbed the president out of the White House. That raid took 20 minutes, right? From the time the first guy stepped off the first little bird until the last guy was getting into the Chinook. 20 minutes. And look, folks, Maduro is a bad guy. I mean, I have my own thoughts about whether we should or not, but if you wanted to pick an evil, blood-soaked dictator who has exported kilotons of poison into this country, it's him.
Yeah.
But, that ripples into the Ukraine situation because I'm sure Putin got up one morning and said, that couldn't happen here, could it, Vasily? No, sir. No, sir, it couldn't happen here.
Well, it's probably exactly what Putin wished he had done in Kyiv on one stormy night, but was unable to. Had a different plan, a special military operation of 3 days. Here we are, 1,418 days on in that special military operation. Well, that's the situation in Kupiansk. And, by the way, there have been reports of hundreds of Russians surrendering. And I don't think it is hundreds of Russians surrendering, because there weren't hundreds of Russians inside Kupiansk. There were fewer than 200, probably fewer than 140. There have been some video clips released that you might have seen on Twitter reporting these mass surrenders of hundreds of Russians. And you look at the video clip and you see these rows of Russian soldiers and you think, well, maybe that's possible. But take a look at that clip a little bit more closely and you will see how close the focus is. So you get a hint of 2 or 3 more rows that may not actually be there.
Yeah, a couple of things I noticed too. They weren't as dirty and beat up as you might expect.
Mm-hmm.
The camera kept moving. It was in. And remember, who is showing me this and what do they want me to think? There have been surrenders, but the biggest one I actually can remember was about a platoon. So that was, 30 guys. I know that happened in the Chasiv Yar area. This was around the time that Ivan Ansky was still in play, and these guys killed their platoon leader and walked out of the field. That's not unheard of in this war. That's happened more than once. But look, these guys are, I think that these people that were captured here, and that was in the Kupiansk sector, I'm thinking that they were captured to the north. Because when they start pulling those guys out of what's left of those 2 positions, Alan, one of the first things you do, you get a prisoner, you look at him, right? Is his uniform filthy? I know this is crazy. I'd look at their mouth. What does that look like? If someone hasn't eaten anything in 4 months, their mouth looks, how they want some water. I watch how they drink it. I mean, all those little things. I look at their hands. So we're going to see some guys coming out of the Kupiansk area, and I encourage her to watch when you look at those prisoners.
Yeah,
they're going to be filthy. Their uniforms are going to be cut up. Their hands are going to be wrapped up. Their feet, they're going to look like hell.
Yeah,
so,
and they've been virtually without supplies for 2 weeks now. That's a long time.
That's a long. You can go a long time without food, but it's especially hard in the winter. You need 5,000 calories just to keep your brain working, right? That's why mountaineers, you eat 7,000 calories a day when you're mountaineering, and, you still lose weight. So combat is about at that level of physical exertion.
Oh, yeah.
The adrenaline comes and it goes and it comes and it goes, and it just pumps you out. So,
well, we're going to take a look at the Kremina operational map. And even though you posted this on the 10th, I believe, Chuck, January 10th, the date on the map itself says 4 January. And I don't think that the situation has changed much between 4 January and the 10th. But what Russia had succeeded in doing was infiltrating these southern and western neighborhoods of Liman very, very lightly. And it was reported by the Ukrainian command. Russian troops have been eliminated from Liman. And it was a very important target for the Russians to have reached.
Yeah, they have been trying to take back Liman for the last 2 years. And, people who've been following us for a while will remember that Liman was an area the Russians held on to as long as they possibly could. And in fact, they retreated too late. They were surrounded on 3 sides. And when they finally disobeyed orders and retreated, or were finally given the order to retreat, it was too late. And they were annihilated on that highway there. They only made little incursions into Liman, but they're out now. And I can't actually remember. I'm scanning for that map. But there was some reports I did in the past 7 days on Kremina, and we could also see some real points of penetration that the Ukrainians made especially north of Liman, they were operating 5, 6, 7, 8 kilometers beyond the zero line. And again, when you have untrained troops, limited combat effectiveness, I've got that map up right now, the Ukrainians are walking right by these guys. So I'm on the 4 January map there, and you have the Ukrainians pushing towards the Zarabets Reservoir. And again, this map shows Ukraine allowing the Russians to push across the Zarabets River and north of Liman. They allow them to take terrain that doesn't advance the cause. Boris is going to call Putin and say, look, I'm advancing towards the Oskil River. Wonderful, but I'm interested in Liman, right? Don't tell me. We even had the great breakthrough there in the Battle of Pokrovsk where the Russians advanced to the north. And people were having the fantods. Oh, it's a major breakthrough. And, Alan pointed out, it's going in the wrong direction, dude.
The situation in Liman is, again, and this actually is an area where the Russians have enjoyed tremendous superiority in forces and equipment, and they just have not capitalized on it whatsoever. And I would love to be getting reports from the Zarebryansk forestry, but we haven't heard anything about those Russian troops in quite some time now.
Well, they've dug in. I first started reporting on this when there was a satellite radar picture of that area, and there was this nest of defensive fortifications, but they weren't connected to anything. And then I started getting the information that these guys had dug in their own little ant farm, and they weren't going anywhere. So, that's going to be potentially significant here. But again, so the Russians are using that forest, and it's you've got to have your doo-doo in one sock to attack in the forest. So they're not fighting the Ukrainians, and they're occupying terrain tough enough that the Russians don't want to apply the resources to get those guys all out of there, right? They're just going to let them fester, which is what they've done. And this is one of the symptoms of an army breaking down, right? The situation right now it's a bit unique. It's in the Zarabets forestry, but in the next 18 months, we're going to see this happen more often, Alan. And,
I think you might see it happen in the middle of the winter, actually.
Yeah, absolutely.
And this is one of the things Chuck and I talked about when we took a look at the scorecard on that long show. Both the Ukrainians and the Russians have an AWOL problem. And, every army in every war has had an AWOL problem. But what Russia has is an insurgency problem. Those troops in the Zarebryansk forestry are insurgent troops of the Russian army.
Yep, they are. Look, and they've cast their lot. They're not going to get forgiven. They're not going to get a clean uniform and a shave and sent back. And there's the other issue. So Ukraine has an AWOL problem. These guys don't desert generally. So 60% of them come back to their unit. So they are absent without leave. If you split the whole program and get caught at the Swiss border robbing a liquor store, you're a deserter. If you have gone home for Christmas and come back. And the other thing is, look, Ukraine deals with that problem proportionally, right? So they'll let you back into the unit and you go back in. But there's this other weird bit of psychology when you get in and start fighting a war a la the Band of Brothers. It doesn't take you very long to realize you're not doing it for God and country anymore. You're doing it for the guys in the platoon. And that is what honestly happens. You bond with that unit, and you would no more want to leave them than you'd leave your family. And in fact, sometimes you choose those guys over your family, which is one of the sort of disturbing truths about military service.
Which we may talk about on one of these future shows, actually, because it's a topic worth getting into when we have a little free time and not so many maps and not so many topics to tackle. And the next thing we do want to talk about is the Russian shadow fleet. The United States has successfully seized 5 sanctioned tankers now in the North Atlantic and in the Caribbean. There are a number of shadow fleet tankers running away from American naval forces. And some tankers, dropped their disguise and raised a Russian flag. Now there is discussion in Europe and with the United Kingdom about what to do in the Baltic. The Baltic is and always has been a bottleneck for the Russians. What would it mean if Sweden, Norway, Finland, the United Kingdom, Denmark all decided together, we're going to start to seize these shadow tankers too?
Well, I don't think there's a whole lot Russia can do about it. I am always delighted to remind everybody the Baltic was one of the reasons why I didn't think Putin would actually go full on and invade Ukraine. I thought marshaling his forces, banging the drum, getting the world to pay attention, getting some high-level meetings, I didn't think he'd be stupid enough to force Finland to join NATO, force Sweden to join NATO. 90% of his commerce, 70% of it, has to go through the Baltic. He doesn't have any warm water ports. And Vladivostok might as well be on Mars, right? It's in the Pacific, where his naval presence is even less. So here's a case where, whenever it tells you we don't need aircraft carriers, I want you to remind them that we are a maritime nation. And furthermore, we are almost world police. We are the last of the blue water global navies. And that's why Russian commerce is imperiled. And Washington has now proven, look, we took 5. We could take 20, 30, 40, 50. And as we're looking at this print of the sanctioned tankers on January 11th, I'll remind our Russian listening guests, every NATO country has a capable maritime commando force. The Danes, the Swedes, the Norwegians, who are outstanding. They can fast rope down on any of these ships and take them. And the Finns have showed you that not only are they willing, they are capable and able, and they have taken 2 of these vessels themselves.
So they boarded, the Finns boarded, I think it was a cargo ship and a tanker. And these were both sanctioned vessels. And one at least was under suspicion of cutting undersea cables. And this is something Russia has now done repeatedly in the Baltics, cutting undersea cables that tie together Finland and Sweden with Denmark, with the Baltics. And that is reason enough to board a ship, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. And here's the other thing. It's what are you thinking? You don't have a navy, right? You have ballistic missile submarines as part of your triad, but unlike American ballistic missile submarines, Russian submarines operate in the White Sea in what are called bastions, right? They've got the giant Typhoon class submarine, which was only designed to ever serve up there. It's the size of an aircraft carrier, and that's groovy, but you fly over it with a compass and it disturbs the magnetic field. So naval BP aviation patrol planes can find these things. They're incredibly vulnerable. The Moskva is sitting on the bottom of the Black Sea, knocked out by a regional opponent in a regional war that didn't even have a freaking navy. So every one of these ships, it's in the power of NATO right now. Now, this is from yesterday, the day before. But NATO could take every one of those ships in one night if they wanted to. And I don't think they're going to do that, but I think they're going to start picking off the egregious offenders, like Eagle S, which was dragging her anchor. There's been some Chinese ships that also deliberately damaged anchors. They got a pass. But also remember, the Bocage, she was taken, not the Boracay, she was taken by the French commander Hubert. So, attention, Moscow listening guest, you can't stop that. And almost all these Shadow Fleet tankers, Alan, they have some Russian troops and intelligence officers on board them. And I don't invite them to fight back. Okay? You're not going to win that. I promise you. You're not going to resist any NATO quality special warfare element. Game's over, dude.
Well, it is something of a humiliation for Putin and Russia. And they apparently have deployed a couple of submarines to trail some of these Russian Shadow Fleet tankers, including one that was seized by the United States. And they might do the same thing in the Baltics, but that's not going to protect a tanker or any vessel from being boarded. And the other thing I would suggest is between the English Channel and the Baltic, it's a relatively low risk operation for all of the NATO countries bordering the Baltic and the channels, right?
It couldn't be any easier. I mean, you could completely land-base the operation in the English Channel. Well, here's the other thing. So and I'm not even convinced they put a submarine in the Caribbean. Hey, we got a submarine out there. Oh yeah, I can see it. What's the submarine going to do? You could run this off a couple of frigates and air power. And what's the submarine going to do? Torpedo an American warship? So, this is a non-winnable game for Russia. And the other thing is, so they got 500 vessels. You don't have to grab every one of them to put them out of the game. You keep intercepting these things, and look, you got a $100 million oil transaction. There is escrow, there's insurance, there's all kinds of stuff. And the crooks, and I mean crooks, who are trading this Russian oil, hey, they don't want to lose $100 million a shot. No one's going to give them insurance. War indemnities, it just isn't going to happen. So the companies and the bad guys willing to trade this oil, they're going to evaporate. No one's doing this for the love of Russia, right? He's got crooks on one end who buy his sanctioned oil, and undermanned and unsafe oil tankers that are 2 decades old are doing this. So this is an interesting time to be a Russian.
Yeah, it's an interesting time to be a European. It's an interesting time to be an American. It is an interesting and terrible time to be Ukrainian. They are struggling with cold and with the continuing terror attacks that Russia has launched. And you're talking about dozens of missiles, hundreds and hundreds of Shahed drones, and not to mention the glide bombs that Russia uses regularly on frontline cities. And for that matter, artillery. Kherson is under artillery attack every single day. And this has meant that 2025, if we look back at that entire year, it has been the deadliest year for Ukrainian civilians. I would actually say from the time Trump assumed office and then started peace negotiations, it seems as though Russia has intensified its terror attacks, and a third more Ukrainians have been killed in 2025 than were killed in 2014. 24. I happen to have the numbers right in front of me. 2,400 Ukrainian civilians were killed. These are children, these are women, these are grandmothers, grandfathers, people asleep in their beds, people in hospitals, people walking to and from the supermarket, people at railway stations, people at restaurants. 2,400 killed, another 12,000 injured. And now millions of Ukrainians suffering from cold and dark, all because of Russian terror.
Yeah, and there is no moral equivalency between a Ukrainian target set and a Russian target set, and we saw it. The last morning we were in Kyiv. You called me and, hey, look, they hit down the street, right? That was not that wasn't a military target.
No. No, you had just left the night before. Actually, the air raid sirens were going off when you climbed onto the train.
Yeah.
And it was the very next morning I went down to Maidan Square and took photographs of smoke rising, not in the square itself, but from the outskirts to the south of Maidan Square. And that's where the helicopters were scooping up water from the Dnipro River and taking it to put out fires in residential neighborhoods of Kyiv. Russia targets residential neighborhoods. They target everything from boiler rooms to hydroelectric dams to coal plants, and they have knocked out just about every way to generate electricity and heat in Ukraine, Chuck.
Yeah. Well, and we've talked about this before, nobody gets bombed into submission, meaning a civilian population. You actually galvanize them, right? Britain did not go to its knees during the Blitz, right? You got those people into the fight. It's something that, people like Putin just never seem to realize. And it didn't work when the Allies did their bombing campaigns of German cities. The Germans made more airplanes in 1945 than they made in the previous 4 years of the war. It categorically does not work. But it is part of the Russian barbarism. And of course, lately using multiple independent reentry vehicles on the beautiful city of Lviv.
Yeah.
There's no germane military targets in Lviv. You're just wiping out a city or trying to.
Yeah. We'll talk about the Oreshnik missile, I think, on another show. It's the only thing we could address really quickly is the fact that when Russia uses the Oreshnik missile, which is an intermediate range ballistic missile, actually designed by Russia to carry nuclear warheads. Well, obviously, it didn't hit Lviv with nuclear warheads. It wasn't armed. Neither of the Oreshnik missiles, two or three have been launched. None have been armed with warheads, Chuck.
Right. This is simply the kinetic force. Remember when there was a strategic defense initiative under Ronald Reagan, one of the weapons being considered in that was it was called rods from God. It was an orbital platform that simply released solid titanium bolts that went through the atmosphere and fell with incredible kinetic energy. So it was not a nuclear weapon. And that's, of course, what's going on here. But, the information about that missile, and we'll go into this later, but they've discovered components that were literally straight from the Soviet 1960s space program. They actually had vacuum tubes, right? We're talking about the paper tiger. A vacuum tube in your intermediate ballistic missile, and I'm not kidding. So this is retro gear. this military superpower, is it in the room with us now?
Vacuum tubes can still be used. I need one in my 1932 radio, as a matter of fact.
Well, there you go. I bet the radio sounds good. We had a big, what was it? Zenith, beautiful Zenith radio.
Yeah, this is a little handmade radio, as I say, from the 1930s. So obviously, I didn't make it. My father made it in 1932 when he was 10 years old as a birthday gift for his mother. And it has run ever since until that one vacuum tube came to the end of its life, and now we can't bring any channel in on that radio. But it's a beautiful little radio in a wooden case. So we're going to come to the end of this broadcast of indications and warnings, and we will remind folks it's January 12, 2026. It is day 1,418 of Russia's full-scale genocidal invasion of Ukraine. And that brings Russia's invasion of Ukraine a day longer than it fought Nazi Germany in the Second World War. So it is a milestone worth noting. And that means that every single additional day of this war is a new milestone that eventually will weigh so much around Putin's neck, he will be pulled down.
And that day's coming, folks. And we're going to be here to happily report on it. Just one thing I'd like to say at the end of most of our broadcast is, look, this war is not winnable by the Russian army. It is not. Unfortunately, I'm still a long war guy, but there is zero possibility of Ukraine being conquered by this army. And their potential to do so diminishes every winter day and every winter night.
Chuck and I are going to continue to look at the Russians and Ukrainians locked in battle in Pokrovsk. We'll look at what is happening in Mariupol. We'll, I'm sure, take a look at what is happening in Kostyantynivka. But join us always on indications and warnings if you can. Suggest to others if you find this information valuable, if you find that your understanding of the war is improved by the conversations that Chuck and I have, bring some other folks with you to the next indications and warnings and ask them to join you and Chuck and me in saying Slava Ukraini.
Heroam Slava. Good night, everybody. Thanks for joining us.